Welcome to Homeschool Tacklecast, the podcast from the authors of the Homeschool Tackle Box Handbook and Workbooks.
We're here to help you discover your children's unique needs as learners. We'll help you apply this knowledge and stimulate your children's motivation, creativity, curiosity, and learning excellence.
We are Sue Notestein and
Nancy Piercy.
We are veteran teachers with over 6 decades of teaching experience, and we come to you from teacherstacklebox.com/homeschool.
Loading your tackle box with the right tools will ensure homeschool is a rewarding and happy experience for both you and your amazing children. Hello, thanks for joining us. As you know, the purpose of this podcast is to help you develop a comprehensive learning profile for each of your children so that you can teach each child the way that they learn. In previous podcasts, you have learned how to evaluate and improve your children's problem-solving skills and level of empathy. You have also learned how to determine your children's personality type and how to use that information to improve communication and create a more productive learning environment. Today, Sue and I will be talking about learning readiness and learning styles, 2 more items to add to your children's learning profile. First, we want to address the issue of learning readiness, which addresses the issue of whether or not your child's brain is ready for the concepts you want to teach. If not, they will not be able to process the information. As you know, children develop at their own unique speed. Not all children walk or talk at the same time. Knowing which stage of development that your child is in allows you to present the material that they are presently capable of learning. Today, we want to show you how you can determine what development stage your child is in so you can use appropriate materials and teaching concepts that your children are able to understand. Sue, you want to talk about the brain transformations that we're going to talk about today?
Yes. We call this, of course, it is called cognitive development. Cognitive relates to the brain. Development means the changes. This involves all the changes that your mind grows through as it matures from a little baby to a grown-up person. And it involves remembering, it involves problem solving and decision making. And this is all the way from childhood to adulthood. And so cognitive development is a really important concept for you to have a little bit of a grasp of. The main guy, the leading psychologist in this field is Jean Piaget. And he studied this his entire life. And he really did a nice body of work to help the rest of us understand everything. And what you learn from this makes sense, and it will really be helpful and a useful foundation for your teaching skills. First of all, he figured out that kids, as they get older, obviously we know as kids get older, they seem to know more. They learn more. They figure things, but they do not just add more and more information to their brain. That might be what you would think, that they would just be adding new and more information. But that's not true. What they do is they actually figure out the world around them through inconsistencies. In other words, between what they expect to be happening and what they actually see to be happening. I love this because they're like little scientists, and science is my field. But they play with their environment, and they know what they expect to see. And if it doesn't happen, then they have to take in that information and try to figure out what's happening. Wait a minute, maybe this isn't the way I thought it was. And then they adjust the information in their brain. So although they may not be aware of doing that, that is what their brain is doing. They're figuring out the world through those inconsistencies. And that was a really interesting thing for Piaget to find.
And I just would add a little story there. My grandson, Huck, is 18 months old, and he's learning how to ride a scooter. And he figured out that if he pulled it up an incline, a little bit of an incline at this place where they were practicing, he could get on it and go down the hill. But he can't get the idea that you can push with your foot. He'll do it a couple times, but he hasn't integrated that yet into his learning sequence on getting on that scooter. So you can just watch him experimenting. It's really interesting.
Yeah, little tiny kids don't understand that everything rolls downhill. It's simple. It's part of life, but it takes that they have to learn it all over again. Piaget divided these stages that children go through and into adulthood into four basic stages. And then he described those stages in detail. So it's really interesting to look at those four basic stages. But it's important that you know, first of all, every child goes through the same stages in the same order. They can't get mixed up in order. They have to go in order. And none of them can be skipped. You can't move from the earliest stage to one in the middle. You have got to go through every stage. But how rapidly they can do that totally varies depending on the child. Everybody is different. So while some at a certain age might be at level 2, there might be others that are still at level 1, or there might be a few that are moving into level 3. So it's really, really, there's no set time frame for it. And so when you read the stages and we talk to you about these stages, we will give you an average of about where it falls in when your kid is developing, but that doesn't mean that your kid has to fit in there exactly. Don't expect them to fit exactly at any of these ages. Just go with the flow. And if they're not, if they look like they don't fit in there, don't worry about it, because it is very much just a kind of an average. But those are things to remember. Everybody goes through the stages all in the same order. Nothing can be skipped, but they all go through at a different pace.
So we want to talk about the four stages, and the first one is called sensory motor. This is from birth to approximately 2 years of age, and Piaget chose to call this stage sensory motor stage because it is through the senses and motor abilities that infants gain a basic understanding of the world around them. They are learning, of course, through their sensations and movements, their senses, taste, sight, touch, smell, and hearing. That's what they have to work with, and that's how they're learning about the world. Around 7 months of age, they begin to acquire memory. They realize that they're separate beings, different from people and objects around them. This is when they like to play peekaboo, and know that the object will reappear, that it hasn't totally disappeared. They also discover certain actions can cause certain things to happen, such as when they cry, they're getting picked up, they're getting a diaper change, they're getting food, they're getting attention. They're learning, how to communicate and how to get things to happen for themselves. And then their mobility increases, such as crawling and walking. And some language skills are developed near the end of this stage. They're using words and they're babbling, and they're using them appropriately, a lot of the words. So it's really interesting to watch that little brain develop and start their language skills. The second stage is pre-operational stage. This is from toddler to early childhood, and approximately age 2 through age 7. During this stage, of course, the toddlers are using words and pictures to represent objects, and their use of language matures. Imagination and memory are being developed. They can use objects in their imagination to be other things than what they are. For instance, a broomstick can become a horse. And anything they have, they can create their mind around it to talk about their story that's in their head. The other important thing on pre-operational stage is that the children do not see things well from the perspective of others. They're very self-centered. They're not yet aware that other people have different opinions or different ideas. They think everybody sees the world as they see the world. And the other thing is that there is no concrete thinking at the pre-operational stage. And Sue's going to now talk about that.
Yeah, the third stage is concrete operational stage. And that this one kind of averages about elementary school age and into early adolescence, maybe 7 through 11 years old. Here, the kids begin to understand what Piaget called the theory of conservation. Now, conservation means saving, and just understanding that things such as liquid or mass or weight does not change when it is moved from one environment to another is something that these young kids have a hard time with. For example, if I have 2 glasses of soda pop in front of me and they are exactly alike and the levels are exactly alike, and you ask the pre-operational kid, you say, which glass has more, they will probably look at it and say they're alike. The concrete kid would, of course, say, yeah, they're alike. Well, then if you take one of the glasses and pour it into a tall, skinny glass, the concrete kid, if you ask again, the pre-operational kid will say, well, the tall glass has more. But you see, the concrete child will know, no, that's not right. He had exactly the same amount. They must still be the same. And so moving into that concrete stage, it is really interesting. And they have this understanding of the theory of conservation. They become more logical in their thinking, but they're very concrete. They can only deal with tangible, physical, real things in their environment. They can't imagine stuff in their head very well. But they're beginning to understand that their thoughts and feelings are their own and that not everyone else will agree with them. And so they recognize that other people also have thoughts and feelings that are their own, but that sometimes they don't always agree. And that's the concrete operational stage. Now, the final stage is called formal operational stage. And the formal operational stage goes from about 12 years and up into adulthood. And here, they actually develop the ability to understand hypothetical problems. They don't have to have the thing right in front of them. They can imagine it, and they can reason through their imagination. They can reason to the correct answer to whatever they're looking at. You see this a lot in teens because they become much more interested in issues that require abstract thinking, like moral values, ethical practices, politics, philosophical questions. In their English classes, they're always writing papers, and they like to pick subjects that they can look at both sides and work with, and they want it to be it and it is abstract for them. And then also the last level, the highest level is the where abstract thinking comes into the higher math concepts. And in this realm, you have to be able to imagine what's going on along with your problem, because otherwise you just can't get it. I can remember when we worked with the at-risk kids that I was doing math and we were starting algebra because they need to pass algebra early on. And that child said, well, Mrs. Notstein, why is there an X in my math problem? Like, what is this letter doing in my math problem? See, and that should have clued me in right there that kid was still concrete. That kid could not do formal thinking at that level for math. And so it's interesting if you know that about your own child. It's important that you know that.
And it's thought that only about 35% of high school graduates completely master this stage of formal operations. That means that you would be a formal thinker in all the disciplines. But most adults are not completely comfortable with high-level formal thinking, such as solving complicated algebra problems. But of course, they do just fine in life. When we wrote this chapter and Sue put in the test, the Piaget test, I became concerned because I certainly wasn't a formal thinker in all the disciplines. I have always had trouble with science and math, and it's because I think I'm too concrete. For instance, in the concrete operational stage, Sue said that you become more logical in your thinking, but remain very concrete and aware of only tangible, physical, real objects in the environment. So when the teacher starts talking about molecules and neutrons and protons and all of that, to me, I had a lot of trouble skipping over the concrete part. I needed to see them. I didn't know how they went together. It was really hard for that concept for me. And also in higher math, I learned as much math as I needed, but it was not easy for me because that's formal thinking. It's not tangible. You can't hold that X in your hand or that Y in your hand. And so I was concerned, because I thought, my gosh, I don't have any formal thinking, but that's just that area, you know. So don't get concerned if you're not a total formal uh, at the total formal stage, because, like it says, only 35% of the Americans really are, and I found that comforting, of course, because I didn't want to be only concrete, of course. All right, so considering these stages, let's talk about reading, because that's something that you hear a lot about. Is your child ready to read? And that means, are their cognitive skills at the level that they can read? And I'm sure that if you've taught several of your children, that everything happens at a different time, which is exactly what we're talking about. And they have to be ready. Their brains, their bodies, everything has to be ready for the reading to happen for them. And you can't push it, and you can't embarrass them because they're not ready. They simply need time to get ready. I ran across an article in preparing for this podcast, and it's written by a lady who is an occupational therapist, Laura Sowden, Sowdon. And like I said, she's an occupational therapist, and she was writing about reading readiness. And you can read this article, and the link is in the show notes. It's really worth your while if you're dealing with a child who's about ready to read. I found it interesting because she started out with physical signs, what your child has to be physically read. What your child has to be doing physically, which will show you that they're more ready for reading. I'll just go through this very briefly, and then you can go read the article. But the physical signs is, can your child skip using opposite sides of their body? Swing one arm while hopping on the other foot. And it's shows the connections between the left and right sides of the body and of the brain. So it's really interesting to see if your child can do that. If they can't, you can help them. You can have them hop on one side, hop on the other side, and kind of train their brain that way. Can your child cross a midline? And that means when a child reaches across their body with one hand, grasp an item, and bring it back across their body without switching hands. If they can do that, then that means their brain is ready for reading. Because if they can't, ordinarily they will go to midpoint of their body and then change hands. So that's something that you could work with and understand. Can your child follow an object with their eyes, just holding it 12 inches from their eyes? Can they track that and move a toy across the side of their eyes and see if they can track it? Because in reading, your eyes have to go across the page, and so you're checking to see if their eyes are ready. Can they balance on one foot with their eyes closed and with their eyes open? And so they need a good brain body connection for reading, and that's another thing that you can check physically. And then, can your child draw themselves with at least 10 body parts without cues or prompts? That means, hair, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, hands, feet, legs, arms. Can they actually do that? That shows a readiness, because you have to recognize letters, you have to recognize intricate concepts. And so that's something else that you can talk about. And she said if they're not, you can take like anything that you can do physically on a surface, and that would be popsicle sticks for arms, a piece of yarn for the head, dots for the eyes, so that they can see all the different parts of a body, and then try to put that reproduce that on a piece of paper, and that will show brain readiness. On the language signs that you're looking for, does your child look at books and words? Can your child make rhymes and play word games? I think that's a pretty sophisticated level, because they're beginning to really hear the sounds and what sounds sound alike. So that's a really good indicator. Can your child identify many kinds of shapes? And can your child use prepositions in their vocabulary? Can your child identify letters, of course? And can your child read their own name? If the child's name is in a bunch of text, can they come up with it and know that that means them? So these are just some pre-reading skills that will help what your children need in order to tackle reading and be successful at it. Again, Laura Sowden, it's in the show notes. I think you'll appreciate this article.
I you talk about that, and it brings a story to me that I remembered since we've been working on the book, and that is back when in the first grade, and when I was in the first grade, they used to make us make a circle, and then everybody in the circle had to read, and they would, you would read a paragraph, and then the next kid would read a paragraph, etc. And there was a little girl in our class named Geraldine, and she got the page that had a picture of a cow, and the name of the cow was Geraldine. Well, it was her turn to read, but could not, she did not recognize her own name. She was obviously not in the right stage for reading at all. And she could not. But of course, us being kids, we just thought that was hysterical that she couldn't recognize her own name, and we laughed at her. And I feel guilty for that today, because when children are put into a situation where their brains are not ready and they are forced into that, then they come away feeling discouraged. They lose self-confidence. And in fact, they begin to hate reading. And sometimes they never, ever actually get over that. And that's a really sad thing, because it's nothing they could do anything about. All they can do is spend some time and grow up a little more, let their brain develop, and then they can read without a bit of trouble. So, I think that's something to think about.
Yes, and I think always being gentle with your kids, because it's not their fault that they're not ready for things. And if you push them or you compare them to your other kids, they're going to feel stupid, like, well, why can't I do this? And maybe really lose confidence. And you'll have more and more problems trying to teach that child. So always, be encouraging and just don't make a big deal out of it. Just wait until they're ready. So in our book, in chapter 3, it includes a lot of resources and a test called How Does Your Mind Work? And you can employ this test to help you ascertain the cognitive age of your child, especially the children that are 12 years and older, if they're struggling in science or math. With your little ones, if you understand the Piaget stages and carefully observe your child, you'll be able to figure out their level without testing.
And I think it's really important to think about that. Think about it, because you're the one that's providing the education here. And how can you help your children achieve their highest level? Give suitable tasks. Do not ask them to read if they're not at that level yet. Give them something that they can accomplish and they can actually do well at. Stress hard work in progress. Let them know, oh, you worked so hard on that. I'm very proud of you. Do not worry if the end result is exactly what you want or not. You need to be encouraging. Use the not yet concept. I love not yet. No matter what, if they have tried and they're just in tears and they can't do it, you can say to them, don't worry. You can't do it yet, but you will. And that leaves that door open. And you can use that in any of the subjects you're teaching, because kids sometimes just don't understand something. And it's a good time to use the not yet concept. And then let you know you're proud of them, proud of their work, regardless of what they ended up with at the end, that you're really proud if they worked hard on it, because that's what it's all about.
Right. So now we're going to leave the four stages, but we're still continuing the idea of whether or not your child is ready to learn, and we want to talk a little bit about the cloze test. That's CLOZE. A lot of
Ooh.
information about this online, and in our book, it will guide you on how to create a cloze test. But the idea is the material that you're using, the curriculum that you're using, the books, the articles, whatever you're asking your child to read, can they read it? Is their vocabulary sufficient? Is their experience sufficient to make sense out of what they're reading? And so you can take this material that you're using and you can create a cloze test and decide and figure out if they're ready or not. Um, what it is basically is that you take a portion of it, like a couple paragraphs, and you leave out every fifth word of a section of the material with a blank space, and your child has to try to fill in the missing words. They have to understand context and vocabulary to do this well, and you will get a really clear idea of whether they can use that material right now with their experience and their vocabulary. It would be discouraging to think that they're just blowing you off or don't care when actually they can't understand that material. You've read things, I know, that are difficult, and you keep reading a sentence over and over again because your experience and vocabulary just aren't in that genre or in what you're talking about. And you have to be very persistent, with a dictionary and everything else in order to understand it. So asking your child to do that for a whole textbook or whatever, it's not fair. They're not ready for it. You've got to get them ready.
And it's really important. This closed test is not hard to do, and it's kind of fun, and the kids enjoy it. But you need to do it the way it's set up. You need to have exactly 50 slots. They'll give you directions, but you need exactly 50 slots, or you won't be able to score it correctly. Scoring is important because you want to know how they're doing. So after the kids have done it and filled in all their words in the blank spaces, I used to just go ahead and grade it as a class and let everybody grade their own. And the idea is that they should find the perfect word that belongs in the sentence that was in what they were reading. For example, if it said the dog jumped over the fence, then the child should, and if fence was the word that was eliminated, then the child should write the word fence in there. Now, not everybody's going to think about fence. Maybe somebody's going to say the dog jumped over the hedge. Maybe they have a hedge at their house. So there's good synonyms, but for the perfect word, you give them 2 points. For the synonym that's a good synonym, you give them 1 point. And you do this all the way through the 50 blanks. And then when you add up the points, you get a percent. Now, if it's greater than 60% that are correct, that means that the child can work independently with that material. That's really a good material and a good level for you to be working at them with. If they score between 40 and 60%, they're going to need some help. They're going to need guidance. They might need the dictionary so they could look words up. They might need a little, some other ways of helping them to do that better. And if it's less than 40%, you're going to need to find another resource for them. You're going to need to find easier supplemental material. And you can design reading guides for your children. And we have descriptions of how to do that. And if you do that, it could be for any of your kids. Even your top reader wouldn't mind doing the reader's reading guide. And certainly the kids between 40 and 60 could benefit from that. And then the ones less than 40% not just benefit from it, they actually have to have it. It's really a pretty neat activity you can do with them. And then share with them how they did on the test. And I noticed I did this with my honors chemistry kids. They would be surprised and they would say, well, I'm a good reader. I've always been a good reader. And look at my score is only 55. How did that happen? Well, part of it is because of the vocabulary, and it's science. And in science, you've always got a bunch of new words that you never heard of before. And so I would just say, don't worry about it. We're going to go ahead and work with this material. And as the year goes on, you're going to get better at it because you will become familiar with the vocabulary. Now, if they're in the 40%, that's not going to help. But for your higher ones that wanted to be 60% but didn't make it, and then they will improve. And I would actually give them the test again at the end of the year. And then they did great because they recognized the vocabulary they were working with. So it's kind of a fun test, and I highly recommend it. I think the kids really enjoyed it. Nancy, you're going to talk about learning styles, right?
Yeah, we're going to transition a little bit here and talk a little bit about learning styles and how you can help your child if you have an idea of what their dominant area is. The learning style theory, I think probably you've heard of this, and you may have been to a workshop that talked about it, and you may be aware that there's controversy about it. If you look it up online, you'll see that they say there are 8 different styles and 4 different styles and 3 different styles, and some research even says, it doesn't make sense that learning style prevails, but we think it does to a certain extent, and we are only going to deal with the 3 major learning styles. Um, the theory is that learning styles involves how people perceive and process information in different ways. And there are many sources online for you to think about that and go into a lot of depth if you want to. Loads of information. But the 3 styles that we want to focus in on are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic or tactile, and kind of explore that and show you how that's important to know in dealing with your children. So, Sue, tell us about the visual learners.
Well, visual learners, everybody has visual learning in them. If they did not, we would not be inundated with ads on television, billboards along the highway. I mean, where your eyes land, I mean, you learn and you actually, that is visual learning. But people that really like visual learning learn well by seeing the information, like you see the billboard or you see the ad on TV. They're usually good readers and spellers, and they like to take notes, which not everybody does like. And they respond well to the visual aids such as graphics and films and diagrams and flashcards and things like that. And so visual learning is probably the most predominant type of learning you run into in your regular life. And everybody has some ability to adapt to visual learning. But some people, that is really their strength. And on some of the others, it's the other kind. And Nancy will tell you about auditory learners.
Right. Auditory learners learn best by hearing rather than reading the information. And so listening to things, listening to tapes, listening to podcasts, listening to anything that they're watching, they're getting more information than they would if they were just reading it or someone was telling them about it. And so auditory learners learn best by saying things out loud. If they have to learn facts or anything like that, saying them out loud to retain the information. Also, jingles and mnemonic devices are helpful in their learning because it's auditory and they're saying it. And then they also like giving oral presentations and participating in discussions because they are sharing information and they're hearing it, and that helps them to digest it. So auditory learners need that. You can't just hand them some notes or a textbook. That's not going to work. All right. And then the last one is kinesthetic or tactile learners.
Yeah,
Sue?
I want to remark about the auditory. You mentioned the jingles and the mnemonic devices, and we have examples in the book. And I can remember when I taught chemistry, or I guess it would have been earth science, when I taught earth science and we had to learn all the planets from the sun out. There's a little song about my mother baked us so many pizza pies. I don't have it exactly right in my mind right now, but the idea was that we could sing this little riddle and that it would give us the different first letters of all of the planets, starting with the ones right in Mercury, right next to the sun. My very educated mother just baked us 9 pizza pies or something like that. Yeah. But then the kids, of course, when Pluto got dumped, then they would laugh because they got to the end and they were doing 2 P's and Pluto was gone because it wasn't supposed to be counted anymore, according to the authorities. And then they would always laugh about that. But that's just an example. When you talk about kinesthetic learners, they learn through touching, moving, and doing. And again, when Nancy was talking about reading readiness, I remember reading an article about people, the inmates in prison that were learning to read, because some of those guys actually do not even know how to read. and they would make them crawl. And see, crawling would be giving them that alternate left, right feeling that Nancy was telling you they should be able to accomplish before they can read. But that would be kinesthetic because it would be a movement in their body. And for some people, they have got to be moving to really create long-term memories, which in a classroom can be annoying because if you have a kid that wiggles all the time, then that kid may be kinesthetic and they may need to put the wiggles in with the rest of their learning. They usually have a short attention span. They enjoy working with objects and they get easily distracted if they're not able to just explore and experiment. So they love labs, they love projects, they love trips, they love demonstrations, and they love to role play. They're very comfortable in all those ways because that allows them that kinesthetic tactile learning. And there are several learning styles inventories in our book, and you can find them in the resources, and you can give them to your kids, take them yourself, and find out what is your dominant style and what their dominant style is. And then it's just something to remember. If you have an auditory learner there, if you can give them a tape of a lecture instead of just reading it in the book, that's going to help them. And it would be a good thing for you to know. But it's real important for you to recognize that once you know what your learning style is and what their learning style is, you do not want to teach in your learning style because it may not match them. But the same thing applies. You do not want to always teach them in their predominant style because they need to be able to use all three. So it's best to give all three in your lessons. I can remember when I belonged to Job's Daughters, and it's an organization and it's based on the book of Job in the Bible. And we would have to memorize the book of Job actually to be able to move up the ranks in Job's Daughters. And I had to memorize that book. And it was hard to memorize, but I recognize now what I would do is I would read it and then I would talk it. I would say it out loud to myself and listen to it. And then I actually would put it to a beat. I could put it to a beat. I could put the feel of it to a beat. And that helped me. Well, that's the kinesthetic part. And the other was the auditory part. And the first part was the visual. So using all three is really the way you want to go.
And in our book, there is a template that if you have a lesson plan and you put it in, it will show you whether you have all three stages of learning style. I think the example was an environmental lesson that Sue had done and how we can recycle and how important that is. And so I know the kinesthetic part was the experiential of going to the dump and seeing, how awful it is that people are throwing all this stuff away. And so that template may be very helpful when you're teaching something to make sure that you're covering all the learning styles that in order to be effective with that lesson. So in conclusion, all the information and activities that we talked about today can be found in our book, Homeschool Tackle Box, along with all the assessments for determining your child's developmental stage and their learning style. We hope that you'll check out our podcast show notes for access to all our referenced material. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please follow and share. Thanks again for joining us today, and we really look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for listening to our Homeschool Tacklecast today. We invite you to join us next time as we cast our line into new and innovative strategies to help you keep your children engaged and excited about learning.
We suggest you go to our website, teacherstacklebox.com/homeschool, and explore what we have to offer in the Homeschool Tacklebox Handbook and also in the teen and elementary workbooks for your children.
Feel free to email us through the contact page on our website. We promise to respond to your questions, comments, and concerns in a timely manner.
Until another day, bait your hook, cast your line and let's go fishing.